these tape ministries, you know, the cassette tape ministries. And we give tape recorders to people in the nursing homes and our shut-ins. And then we deliver a tape every week. And when you're preaching, you're very close to the mic over there. We didn't have a mic like this, but they had just the regular mic. And, well, quite honestly, it's destroying people's ability to worship after they've heard you sing. The problem was, I think she was telling the truth. A second detour this morning. Lloyd Ogilvie was a Presbyterian pastor, pastored at Hollywood Presbyterian in California, and a number of other places. Very well known in the 60s, 70s, 80s. I heard him preach one time at a large gathering, and he always preached without notes. And they said, why did you do that? What happened? He said, I had a powerful experience when I was in my second church. He said, we had to drive to church, we had 3 kids, and everything was, and one of the kids was acting out when I got out of the car, and I put my Bible on top of the pulpit, or on top of the car. I reached to grab one of the kids, the wind hit and blew my sermon all away. And he said, so from that day on, he said, I was scared to death, but I preached without notes. Well, this morning I stepped out of the car, and somehow my sermon slipped out of the Bible, but it didn't get far enough away. I think that means that God doesn't trust me without a few notes. Let us pray. For your word, O God, we give you thanks. For this ancient account from Hebrews, which reminds us of the faith and of those who have gone before us, we give you thanks. And pray that you will take this word and open it to our hearts and our minds and our souls on this day. Amen. This sermon, along with last week's and the 2 weeks that will follow, is a sermon. Sermons not only talk about what we believe as United Methodists, but how do we get to where we believe. And you remember that last week we started not only talking about God's Word and Scripture, but we began with the affirmation that we are a people of God. We are a people of God who have been touched by God's grace and have chosen to worship and follow God. And we are a people, as we talked last week, grounded in the Word. And that is the heart of our life of faith. And as we look then at tradition and experience and reason, we do it through the filter of God's Word. Today we move to the second, tradition or history. And then next week will be experience. What I've experienced, those experiences that are hard to put into words but are very, very real. And then the issue of reason. Where do we apply, how does our brain work with our faith? When I decide to become a follower of Jesus Christ, do I have to throw my brain completely out? Or when I can't figure out something, does it mean it's not true? We're going to explore some of those and probably leave you with more questions than answers. I heroes of Abraham and Moses and David and the disciples, to Paul and the church fathers and of the early years, to the reformers, to, in America, the circuit-riding preachers and all that went on, to also include those who have had an impact on our life. So it is that God has touched people in the past, and we, as people living today and looking to the future, can be enlightened by tradition. Tradition is also the wisdom of the creeds, the stories of life and faith, the writings. In the histories, we remember the struggles of faith from a bygone time. And we realize they're not so ancient, for we're dealing with those even in our day. And let us not forget the hymns of faith, and even our own personal remembrance. Like last week, I'm going to begin with some affirmations. I affirm that tradition informs us and prepares us for facing today and tomorrow. It is important for us. It informs us of what has happened in the past, what has worked, and what has not worked. I read USA Today a couple or 3 years ago, maybe even further, where a woman in California demanded her money back from an amusement park because the dinosaurs weren't alive. Now, there was some disconnect there, and she was serious about it. She said, I paid good money to see live dinosaurs. But her understanding of history was limited enough that she was certainly going to be disappointed. A history professor said, history of the church gives us roots for recognizing God's working today. It is not only how God has worked in the past, but I don't know how many times when I've been struggling with something in my life or in the life of the church, and you read something in history and you say the only thing that has changed is the dates or the style of clothes. It's the same issue that we are facing. There are some things we can learn from history. As I was working on this sermon in its original form, I was at the same time reading of the book on the patron saint of Ireland, St. Patrick. I just thought St. Patrick was someone who got almost deified and was a good guy and a hard worker, but there was so much more there if you read that. For he understood how to take the alive gospel to a group of people who had no understanding of what culture and faith was about. And as you read that, you realized there were lessons for us today. In a culture that is becoming increasingly less Christian, the need to understand how to relate to people who were not of faith and didn't even have a foundation of it. There is some tremendous, powerful truth in that. Or we can go back to the 2nd and 3rd century of the church when there was an Arian controversy. Now, Arius was a bishop. I guess it was in the 3rd and 4th centuries. And Arius was a bishop, and he had a belief that Jesus was fully divine, but really wasn't human. In other words, he believed that it was just Jesus' spirit. And he didn't really suffer on the cross because he was a spirit and couldn't suffer. And he saw Jesus as being so holy that he couldn't be human. And the church struggled with that and came out with an affirmation that Jesus is fully human and fully divine. If you will look at some of the controversies that affect us even in the 21st century, you'll see the issue of the divinity of Christ and the humanity of Christ